Her name was Joyce Vincent. She was 38, vibrant by all accounts, friends, sisters, career, someone people remembered. She died in her London flat in December 2003. Her body wasn't found until January 2006. When investigators finally got in, the television was still on, the heater still running. She was surrounded by Christmas presents she had wrapped but never delivered. Not unusual, right? People die every day. But now, Tokyo. A man died in his apartment. His body wasn't found for 3 years. His rent kept getting paid. His utilities stayed on. They only found his skeleton because his bank account finally ran dry. 2 people, 2 cities, different languages, different everything. Same silence. Welcome to the Always On Mute podcast, where we know not everyone was born with a mic in their hand or a megaphone in their mouth, but we still have something to say, because quiet is still a voice. Welcome to the Always On Mute podcast. I'm Antonia, and this is where quiet minds speak with intention. So the Joyce Vincent story, we spoke about it a few episodes ago, so please check that one out. And today we're coming to you with this one. So I like to do these stories that I think most of us do not know about or have ever seen. And I am happy to be able to share them with you so that you are aware of the goings on in other countries and other communities. If you have been here before, thank you for being here. Thank you for subscribing, and thank you for coming back. I truly appreciate it. And if this is your first time, I'm glad you found your way here. If this feels like a place that you believe that you belong, go ahead and subscribe. All right, so there is a word in Japan for what happened to that man, the man that was found 3 years after he died. Kodokushi. It translates roughly to lonely death, but that translation doesn't fully carry the weight. It's not just dying alone. It's dying alone and being undiscovered. Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. Sometimes, like this man in Tokyo, for years. And Japan is dealing with this on a scale that is hard to sit with. In 2024, the National Police Agency in Japan reported that just in the first 6 months of that year alone, more than 37,000 people were living alone, and they were found dead in their homes. 37,000. 75% were over 65. Nearly 4,000 of those bodies had been there for more than a month before anyone found them. 130 of them had been there for at least a year. There's an entire industry in Japan built around cleaning up after these deaths. Companies send workers in with masks, gloves, plastic suits, workers who walk into apartments where decomposition has already done what decomposition does, and they sort through what remains. One cleaner named Masatomi Yaku said he sees more cases now than ever before. He says sometimes it's scary inside, and then he goes back the next day and does it again and again. Another cleaner, Miyu Kojima, started something interesting. She makes miniature dioramas of the rooms she cleans, tiny detail scenes. Not to be disturbing, but because when she would tell people about Kodokushi, they would shake their heads and say, that would never happen to them. They couldn't imagine dying unnoticed. So she built the rooms, and she built them so that they can see. She was 24 years old. She said the case that stayed with her most was a woman in her 20s who died in her apartment with her dog. The dog had been barking. No one came. No one. And the woman's father, when he finally found out, told Miyu that he had been too strict, that he had been hard on his daughter, that he regretted it. And she said she felt powerless because by the time regret shows up, there's nothing left to do. And I keep thinking about that father. Kodokushi is not a new thing, right? Japanese newspapers were writing about it as early as the 1970s. Researchers were studying it by 1973, but it moved from the margins to a national conversation after 1995, after the Great Hanshin earthquake, when thousands of elderly people were displaced into temporary housing and started dying alone in those small units, cut off from everyone they knew. That earthquake cracked open something that was already there, because the truth is, the conditions for Kodokushi, well, they were being built long before that quake. Japan has the oldest population in the world. By 2024, people 65 and older made up 29% of the country, and a significant number of them live alone. The National Institute of Population and Social Security Research puts it at nearly 1 in 5 seniors living without anyone else in the household. And here is where it gets complicated, because it's not just old age. The economic collapse of the 1990s, what they call the lost decade, pushed many Japanese men out of the workforce early through layoffs and forced retirements. For many of those men, work was identity. Work was structure. Work was where their social world lived. Without it, some of them didn't know how to build connection anywhere else. Many had never married. Many had let their relationships go thin because the company was their community. And when the community went away, so did a lot of what held their life together. Studies show that men in Japan between the ages of 50 and 70 are some of the most at risk. One research analysis found that the average age of a male Kodokushi victim was 61. And while most public conversation around this focuses on the elderly, researchers tracked 742 cases of lonely deaths among people aged 20 to 39 between 2018 and 2020. 20 to 39. That's not old age. That's something else. Japan's Cabinet Office released data showing that around 40% of people in the country reported feeling lonely. And the age group with the highest rate of often or always feeling lonely was 20 to 29, not the elderly, young adults. I want you to hold that for a moment, because we keep telling ourselves that younger people are more connected, right? They're online, they have followers, they post, people watch their stories. But being seen on a screen is not the same as being known by a person. And that gap is starting to show. What stood out to me when I read that was the way it quietly dismantled the story we tell ourselves. The story that says, this happens to the very old, the very forgotten, the very far away. But those were young people. People with their whole lives supposedly ahead of them. People who, in any other conversation, we would say had so much to look forward to. And they died. And no one noticed soon enough. There's another piece of this that Japan has been dealing with for decades. They call it Hikikomori. It refers to people often young, but not always, who withdraw from social life almost entirely. Not for a few days, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. They stay in their rooms. They stop going to school or work. They reduce contact with everyone until it becomes no contact at all. Researchers have connected hikikomori to a higher risk of isolation and lonely death, because withdrawal over time can become invisibility, and invisibility over time can become dangerous. Japan's government estimated in 2023 that over 1 million people were living in hikikomori conditions, over 1 million people who had, for all practical purposes, stepped out of the visible world. There's a cultural layer here that I couldn't let go of. In Japan, there's a concept called Meiwaku. It roughly means being a burden, imposing on others, causing inconvenience. It is deeply embedded in how Japanese people move through the world. You don't ask for too much. You don't make your needs known in a way that could trouble someone else. right? Researchers studying Kodokushi have named Meiwaku as one of the barriers. People who are isolated, who are struggling, who might need someone to check in, may still not reach out. Not because they don't want connection, but because reaching out feels like an imposition. I want you to hear that. Reaching out feels like an imposition. Some people suffer quietly because being a burden feels worse than asking for help. And that is not uniquely Japanese, is it? That's a feeling a lot of quiet people carry. The idea that needing something from someone, company, a phone call, just the knowledge that someone would even notice you disappeared, is asking too much. That you should be self-sufficient. That wanting connection and not having it is somehow your fault. That is not just a Japanese problem. That is a human one. I told you at the beginning about the man whose skeleton was found 3 years after his death because his bank account finally ran out. What I didn't tell you is this. That story became national news in Japan in the year 2000. It shook people. It started conversations. Government programs launched. Volunteer patrols started in some communities. Motion sensors were installed in apartment buildings to detect when residents hadn't moved in a while. A neighborhood near Tokyo called Tokiwadari set up helplines and social activities specifically to make sure elderly residents stayed visible. And in April 2024, Japan passed an actual law, a loneliness and isolation law, treating loneliness as a public issue, not just a private struggle. And still, in the first half of 2024 alone, 37,000 people were dead in their homes. 4,000 of them were more than a month. The knowing didn't fix it. And that's the part that sat with me the longest. Because Japan has known about this for decades. This isn't a crisis that snuck up on anyone. People have been writing papers, launching awareness campaigns, creating volunteer programs, and building entire industries around the aftermath of it. And the numbers keep going up. Which makes you ask, what are we actually missing? A doctor named Shinzo Kodo put it plainly. He said the traditional family unit and the support it once provided is slowly fading away. He said children don't take care of parents the way they used to. And Toshio Sugano, 70 years old, has a daughter. They rarely speak. He said simply, I try not to be a burden. There it is again, burden. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough when these stories are told. The systems we built to make life easier can also make disappearance easier. Rent paid automatically, utility bills on direct debit, subscriptions that renew themselves, a phone sitting on a table looking like someone might pick it up at any moment. From the outside, everything can look like life is still running. The lights are on. The account is active. The payments are going through. So nobody flags it. Nobody questions it. Modern life can keep functioning even when the person is no longer there. Joyce Vincent's rent was covered for months after her death. The Tokyo man's bank account paid his bills for 3 years. The automation wasn't the problem, but it removed one of the old signals that something was wrong. Japan is not the only country where this is happening. South Korea has it. They call it Godokushi. Hong Kong has been watching the same pattern emerge. Researchers have started calling Kodokushi a warning, not just a Japanese problem, but a preview. What happens to a society when the structure of human connection starts to thin? When people live longer, but not more connected? when family structures change faster than anything new forms to replace them. Japan is just further along on that particular road. And if you listen to this and feel removed from it, geographically, culturally, I want to gently push back on that. Because the conditions that produce Kodokushi are not strange or far away. They are people who live alone. People who believe they shouldn't need too much. People who have let their relationships become thin over time. People whose identity was tied to something that eventually ended. A job, a marriage, a role. And who didn't know how to rebuild after. Those are not foreign conditions. Those are human ones. I think about the introverts who listen to this. The ones who find solitude genuinely nourishing. The ones who don't need a crowd to feel okay. And I want to be careful here, because solitude is not the problem. There's a difference between choosing quiet and disappearing inside of it. There's a difference between needing less social stimulation and having no thread back to anyone. Solitude is not the problem. Solitude without connection to anyone at all, that's where it gets dangerous. Miyu, the cleaner who built the dioramas, said something that I've been sitting with. She said the people who die of Kodokushi aren't always the deeply isolated ones. Many of them had full lives, relationships, people who cared about them. They just fell through the gaps. Communication lapse. People assumed they were fine. No one wanted to impose. And somehow, between all the people who cared and the person who died, there was just enough silence to let it happen. We started with Joyce, 38 years old, vibrant, people who remembered her, a television still on, Christmas presents she never got to give. She wasn't in Japan. She wasn't elderly. She wasn't someone who had obviously fallen through the cracks. She was, by every outward measure, a person with people. And still, I don't have a clean ending for this one. I really do not. I don't think it deserves one. But I will say this. If you are someone who lives alone, and more of us do every year, and if you are someone who moves through the world trying not to be too much trouble, I want you to consider that the people in your life probably want to hear from you more than you think. Checking in is not imposing. Being known by someone is not weakness. And if you are someone who has a problem like that in your life, someone quiet, someone who seems fine, someone who hasn't reached out in a while, maybe you reach out first. Not because something is wrong, just because they matter. They matter and you want them to know it. Thank you for listening to this episode today. If it stayed with you, share it with someone you think needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave me a comment or a message below, because I want to know what you think about this global issue, because I think that is global. If there's someone in your life you have been meaning to check in on, let this be that little nudge. Go ahead and do it. Please remember, being quiet doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means that you choose your words with intention. Stay muted and stay mighty. Take care.